The box sat there like a wound that refused to close. In the heart of Ouagadougou, inside the worn stone halls of the presidential palace, everything had gone silent. Ministers, generals, and aides stood frozen along the high-arched walls, their breathing shallow, their eyes flickering nervously toward the center of the room. There, beneath the glow of a single iron lamp, stood Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a figure both revered and feared. His uniform was simple, bearing no flashy medals, no unnecessary gold trim, only the insignia of a man who had bled for his country when others bartered it away. His gloved hand hovered just above the aged, nondescript wooden box placed carefully on the ceremonial table. No one dared speak. Not after what had happened that morning. A coded letter had arrived at the gates of the palace at dawn, delivered by a boy no older than 10. No insignia, no explanation. Just a seal, a crude, ancient mark that only a few in the room would even recognize, the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. An ancient symbol of betrayal and renewal. The letter contained no threats. Only instructions. Open the box, alone. Witness your fate. Some had begged him to burn it, to treat it like the curse it surely was. Others whispered of explosives, poisons, sorcery. But Traoré had only nodded, as if the choice had already been made the moment the box crossed his threshold. Now, with the world watching through unseen eyes, he pressed his fingers against the rough wood. In the corner of the room, Minister Kabor shifted his weight, the sound of his polished boots scraping stone far louder than it should have been. Traoré caught the movement but said nothing. His instincts, sharp as razors honed by betrayal and war, recorded every flinch, every shallow breath in the room. Still he hesitated. Because Ibrahim Traoré understood something most men never learned until it was too late: it's not the trap you see that kills you. It's the one you know is coming, but still must walk into. Slowly, almost ceremonially, he removed his glove, letting it drop soundlessly to the floor. His hand, calloused and worn from years of conflict, trembled, just barely, before he pressed it to the latch. The box creaked open. A single piece of fabric rested inside. A cloth, dark crimson, folded neatly with a careful hand. Old. Heavy with meaning. And atop the fabric was a bullet. A simple, unmarked bullet. The room held its breath as Traoré reached in and lifted the cloth, allowing it to unfurl just slightly. Golden embroidery glinted from the heavy folds, symbols of an ancient kingdom. Beneath the golden weave, a phrase was stitched in archaic Dioula, the language of ancestors whose graves had long been plundered by foreign greed. Beware the hand that feeds you. Traoré's jaw tightened. He turned the cloth over, finding a second inscription hidden on the reverse side, a list of names. 6 names. Each name burned like a brand into his mind. Each one was a man or woman who sat, even now, within these very walls. Advisors. Generals. Brothers in arms. Traitors. The world seemed to tilt slightly, the walls pressing in, the air thickening like storm clouds about to break. Somewhere near the doorway, a soldier's fingers twitched toward his weapon, before remembering himself. But Traoré did not move for his gun. Instead, he did something far more terrifying. He smiled. A slow, quiet smile, not of humor, but of understanding. Without speaking, he folded the cloth carefully back into the box, set the bullet atop it once more, and closed the lid with deliberate grace. When he finally looked up, his eyes swept the room, pinning each face under the weight of terrible knowledge. "Lock the doors," he said calmly, his voice slicing through the air like a blade. The guards obeyed instantly, metal slamming into place. Somewhere, Minister Kabor shifted again, but now it was too late for second thoughts, too late for regrets. "You brought this upon yourselves," Traoré said, his voice low, carrying more judgment than rage. "And now, the world will watch how we deal with betrayal." The storm had begun. And no one, not the traitors, not even Traoré himself, could predict how far it would reach. The heavy locks echoed like gunshots through the chamber. The ornate double doors of the presidential hall had never seemed so final, so absolute. No one spoke. No one dared. Ibrahim Traoré stood alone at the head of the room, the sealed box resting once again at the center of the long mahogany table. He didn't need to point fingers. The 6 names burned behind his eyes like fire on dry grass. He knew. More importantly, they knew he knew. Slowly, he unfastened the ceremonial belt from his waist and laid it neatly on the table, as if signaling that titles, ranks, and protocols were now meaningless. Minister Ibrahim Traoré said, his voice deceptively soft. The aging minister flinched, sweat already pooling at the collar of his tailored suit. Mr. President, Captain, I assure you, I have no idea. Sit. The single word held more weight than any shouted command. Ibrahim slumped heavily into the nearest chair. Traoré's eyes swept the others, General Diallo, whose cold precision on the battlefield had been legendary, Ambassador Sao, known for her velvet words and silken deceptions, Colonel Ndaur, who had risen too fast, too far, and too more, their faces stone masks carved by years of surviving the dangerous undercurrents of Burkinabe politics. I know you're scared, Traoré said, circling the table like a lion among jackals. You should be. The walls of the chamber seemed to close in further with every step he took. The old portraits of past leaders loomed as silent witnesses to the unfolding reckoning. Somewhere out there, Traoré continued, someone thought they could own me. Someone thought I would kneel. He stopped behind Ambassador so her breathing quickened, hands tightly clenched in her lap. The slightest tremor betrayed her perfect facade. They were wrong. With deliberate calm, Traoré lifted the bullet from the box and held it up between thumb and forefinger. This was meant for me. A warning. A message. His eyes blazed. But I will choose where this bullet lands. The silence was suffocating. Then came the breaking point. Ibrahim surged up from his chair, hands shaking violently. You don't understand, he cried. They made us choose, Captain. You think we wanted this? You think we wanted to betray you? The admission exploded into the room like a grenade. General Diallo shifted uncomfortably, his thick fingers tightening around the polished armrests of his chair. Ndaur stared blankly at the far wall. Ambassador Sao lowered her gaze, defeated. Who? Traoré demanded. Ibrahim crumbled back into his chair, face pale and ashen. His lips quivered but no sound came. Who forced your hand? No answer. Traoré stepped closer. You will speak, Ibrahim. Or the world will watch you fall without a final word. For a moment, Ibrahim seemed to age 20 years. His shoulders sagged, his voice a broken whisper. The consortium. The word hit the room like an earthquake. Traoré stood motionless. The shadows deepened in his sharp eyes. The consortium, an international cabal of financiers, corporate puppeteers, and foreign agents. The faceless empire that had siphoned Africa's lifeblood for generations under the mask of aid and stabilization. They were the unspoken terror. And they had dared to come for him. Traoré exhaled slowly. What did they offer? Ibrahim closed his eyes. A future. Or an ending. Traoré laughed coldly, the sound sharp and hollow. You chose your future at the cost of your soul. The door burst open. A young officer stormed into the room, rifle in hand, breathing hard. Captain. Sir. We have movement, outside the compound. Armored vehicles. Foreign mercenaries. The timing was surgical. The consortium had calculated his reaction, his hesitation, even his mercy. They had unleashed their dogs just as the box was opened. Traoré's eyes darkened. His voice dropped into the iron resolve that had turned young soldiers into legends on the battlefield. They come for my head. The officer nodded grimly. Yes, sir. Traoré scanned the frightened faces of his council. The traitors. The cowards. The ones who had sold him for silver but still clung to life. Let them come. He stepped to the window and gazed out at the city lights shimmering against the encroaching darkness. The distant hum of armored vehicles carried on the wind. The night was heavy with the weight of an unspoken war. We will not run. We will not kneel. If they want a final chapter, I will write it in fire. As the officer saluted and rushed to prepare the palace defenses, Traoré turned back to his captive audience. I gave you my trust. You shattered it. The box still sat open on the table, silent and damning. You have one chance to redeem yourselves, Traoré said, voice cold as steel. Stand with me against them, or die as pawns of foreign masters. The decision had to be made. Outside, the low growl of engines grew louder. Inside, the seconds ticked away like falling blades. The presidential palace had become a fortress. The main gates, once symbols of diplomacy and peace, now bristled with barricades, sandbags, and soldiers in battle formation. The soft golden glow of the city skyline was eclipsed by dark silhouettes, armored personnel carriers, tactical trucks, and black-clad figures fanning out like jackals encircling a wounded lion. Ibrahim Traoré stood at the high window, watching the foreign mercenaries prepare to breach. The distant whine of drones circled like vultures. It was not just an attack. It was a message, even you can be erased. He turned back to the chamber where the 6 accused sat in stunned silence. His voice cut through the tension like a blade. Choose. General Diallo was the first to stand. The old warrior's face was carved from granite, and for the first time in months, his eyes held no calculation, only resolve. I was a fool, Captain. I let fear control me. I stand with you. Without waiting for approval, Diallo crossed the room and took position by the heavy double doors, signaling for weapons. One by one, the others followed. Colonel Ndar reluctantly. Ambassador Sao with shaking hands. The youngest minister, barely able to meet Traoré's eyes, stood last, ashen and defeated. Only Kabor remained seated, pale and unmoving. Traoré approached him slowly. You were the first to confess. You were the bravest, or the most desperate. Will you finish what you started? Kabor's eyes glistened with a mix of regret and terror. If I say yes, will I be forgiven? Traoré gave no answer. Instead, he extended his hand. Kabor stared for a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, then reached up and clasped it. The unspoken pact was sealed. The emergency lights in the palace flickered red. Alarms wailed as the enemy moved in. In the inner courtyard, Captain Zita, commander of the Presidential Guard, sprinted toward the war room. Captain Traoré, they've disabled comms. They're jamming everything. We're blind. Traoré grabbed the younger man by the shoulder. Not blind. Focused. Zita's eyes burned with determination. They have numbers, armor, air support. Traoré smiled grimly. Then they'll learn what happens when you corner men with nothing left to lose. The 2 men bolted down the marbled hallway to join the defensive perimeter. Traoré's boots echoed like distant gunfire on stone. The main entrance shuddered violently. Boom! Another blast. The ornate ironwork twisted under the impact of a breaching charge. From the balcony above the entrance hall, Traoré raised a radio and barked orders. All units, hold fire until my command. Let them think we're broken. The doors exploded inward in a ball of flame and splinters. The first wave of mercenaries stormed through with brutal efficiency, black visors, silent weapons, hand signals slicing through the smoke. They advanced methodically. But they had misjudged the resolve of the men and women waiting in the shadows. Traoré whispered into the radio, now. The trap sprung like a steel jaw. Presidential guards emerged from every alcove, every corner, rifles blazing. The high walls of the hall magnified the deafening roar of gunfire. Smoke and chaos reigned. Ibrahim himself leapt from the balcony, landing hard on the marble with a roll, rising already firing his sidearm. 2 mercenaries dropped. A third lunged with a combat knife. Traoré spun, disarmed the attacker with brutal precision, and sent him crashing into the wall. The lines shifted violently as both sides clashed in brutal close-quarters combat. Mercenary commanders screamed into radios. Their intel had promised an easy extraction, a quiet decapitation strike. Instead, they were bleeding in a labyrinth of traps and iron-willed defenders. As Traoré ducked behind a pillar, bullets stitching the air above him, Zita slid in beside him, panting. "They're bringing in heavier armor." Traoré clenched his jaw. "Then we bring them the fire." He keyed his radio again. "Initiate Protocol Black Sunday." Deep beneath the palace, seismic charges, long hidden for this very moment, armed silently. The next wave of armored vehicles crossed into the inner courtyard. A split second later, the ground erupted with controlled fury. 2 carriers flipped like toys. Fire and debris rained down. The mercenary assault fractured. The battle turned. Inside the smoke-filled hall, Traoré emerged like a phantom. His voice rang out over the chaos. "To me. For Burkina Faso." His soldiers rallied, pressing the broken invaders back toward the gates. Outside the walls, the last of the armored columns hesitated. The mercenaries knew then what the world would soon know: Ibrahim Traoré would not fall. Not tonight. But the battle was not over. Far from it. As the gunfire tapered and the dead lay strewn across the once hallowed halls, Traoré looked up grimly. Distant helicopters approached on the horizon. The second wave. The real war was about to begin. The helicopters roared closer, slicing through the night sky like mechanical beasts. Their searchlights swept across the burning courtyard, illuminating the wreckage of armored vehicles and the twisted remains of the first assault. Inside the palace, Ibrahim Traoré wasted no time. He barked rapid orders to Zita and the battered remnants of the guard. "Positions. Anti-air on the roof. Hold the inner perimeter. We fight until the last breath." The soldiers, many of them bleeding and battered, responded with grim determination. No one hesitated. Not after what they had witnessed. Not after seeing their leader, not from behind a desk or television screen, but standing shoulder to shoulder in the smoke and blood, refusing to yield. On the roof, 2-man teams dragged the aging Manpad's launchers into position. Old Soviet-era weapons, barely functional, their targeting systems blinking uncertainly. It wasn't much, but it was something. In the war room, Traoré slammed his hand onto the battered radio transmitter, switching to the old emergency frequency, one he knew the foreign invaders would not have scrambled. "To all Burkinabe loyalists, to all free sons and daughters of our land, this is Ibrahim Traoré. They have come to break us. They have come to silence us. I say, let the world see our answer." He released the button. He knew the message would scatter across civilian channels, amateur radios, even the dusty radios in the farthest villages. He wasn't just fighting for the palace. He was fighting for the spirit of a people long crushed under foreign boots. The first helicopter loomed into range. A soldier on the rooftop, his left arm bandaged hastily, steadied the missile launcher on his shoulder. He whispered a prayer to the ancestors and fired. The missile screamed into the sky, tracing a glowing arc. The helicopter banked sharply, too late. The explosion painted the night in fire. Cheers erupted from the rooftop. But the victory was short-lived. 3 more helicopters moved into formation, releasing fast-roping commandos onto the shattered courtyard below. These were not mercenaries. These were professionals. Black uniforms. Night vision visors. Movement so swift and silent it seemed unreal. Inside the palace, Kabor stumbled toward Traoré, eyes wide with terror. "We can't hold against this. They're coming." Traoré grabbed him by the collar and pulled him close. "We hold, or we die on our knees." Gunfire cracked from the windows as the commandos stormed toward the entrance, sweeping in deadly precision. Every corner became a killing ground. Then came the betrayal. A gunshot, inside the palace. From behind. Traoré spun instinctively. One of the counselors, Colonel Ndaur, was on the ground, blood pooling beneath his head. Standing over him, smoking pistol in hand, was Ambassador Sao. Her face was no longer the face of a trembling loyalist. It was calm, focused, almost serene. Behind her, more figures moved, foreign soldiers, emerging from a hidden side door. She had smuggled them in while everyone's eyes were on the front. A trap within the trap. You never truly turned, did you? Traoré said, his voice cold. Sao tilted her head slightly, almost with pity. You're brave, Ibrahim. But bravery changes nothing. The world is bigger than your ideals. The consortium owns history now. The foreign soldiers raised their weapons toward Traoré. But he did not move. Behind him, Kabor shouted in despair, diving for cover. Guards who had survived the courtyard charge scrambled, but they were pinned down. Sao stepped closer. You could have joined them. You could have lived like a king. Traoré's lip curled in disdain. A king? No. A puppet on a foreign throne. Sao lifted her weapon, aiming for his heart. At that moment, Traoré smiled, not the resigned smile of a man accepting death, but the feral grin of a man who knew something no one else did. You misunderstand, he said quietly. History is not owned. It is made. From the corner of the ceiling, a panel snapped open. A second hidden squad, loyal elite guards, previously concealed, leapt into action. Traoré's true trump card. The room erupted into chaos. Gunfire thundered in close quarters. Foreign soldiers fell. Sao's face twisted in shock as she realized too late she had miscalculated the man she had tried to betray. Traoré surged forward, striking her weapon aside with brutal force, disarming her. She fought like a cornered snake, lashing out, but Traoré slammed her against the marble pillar. For a moment, their faces were inches apart. You chose your masters, he growled. You chose your chains. He left her alive, cuffed and bleeding on the ground, because death would have been too merciful. The foreign forces retreated under relentless fire, scrambling for extraction as Traoré's loyalists pushed back with savage fury. Above them, the helicopters veered away, unwilling to lose more. In less than an hour, the mighty second wave, the best money could buy, had been broken. Traoré stood amid the wreckage, blood staining his uniform, breathing hard. He looked down at Sao, at the scattered dead, at the burned walls of the palace. And he realized this was only the beginning. Outside the gates, a new sound began to rise, not gunfire, but voices. Thousands of voices. Civilians had flooded the streets. Men, women, children. Farmers, students, merchants. Waving flags, banging drums, chanting Ibrahim Traoré's name. The country had seen the assault. They had heard his call. And they had answered. The world had tried to erase him quietly in the dark. Instead, they had ignited a revolution. The dawn over Ouagadougou had never looked so different. Smoke curled lazily into the golden sky. The presidential palace stood scarred and blackened, yet defiant, like an ancient warrior who had withstood 1,000 storms. The streets below surged with people, thousands now, maybe tens of thousands. They carried banners, makeshift signs, the national flag of Burkina Faso fluttering proudly among the crowd. And they waited. For hours they had stood at the gates, shoulder to shoulder, refusing to leave despite the threat of more gunfire, more foreign retaliation. They waited for the man who had refused to kneel. Inside the palace, Ibrahim Traoré sat alone in the war room. His uniform was torn, blood-stained at the edges. His hands, rough and calloused, rested atop the closed wooden box that had started everything. The bullet still lay inside. Cold. Silent. Heavy with meaning. Zita stepped into the room quietly, his face softening at the sight of his exhausted leader. "They're calling it a miracle," he said softly. "The people, they're calling you the man who would not fall." Traoré didn't answer. His eyes remained on the box. "Foreign news outlets are here already," Zita continued. "They want a statement. They want to know how you survived. What you plan to do." Traoré exhaled slowly, his gaze distant. "Let them wait." He reached into the box and removed the crimson cloth, letting it unfurl one final time. The ancient Diola phrase stared back at him. "Beware the hand that feeds you." The names of the traitors had been burned into his memory, but now, in the aftermath, something else weighed heavier. The world had not just sent weapons. It had sent a message. You are small. You will submit. Instead, Traoré had sent his own message in return. We may be small, but we are not yours. He folded the cloth with reverence, then stared at the bullet. Slowly, deliberately, he slipped it into his pocket. A symbol. A reminder. Not as a trophy, but as a warning, to himself, and to all who would come after him. Outside, the restless roar of the crowd grew louder. Zita's voice broke softly. They're waiting for you. Traoré stood, tall despite the weight of exhaustion. His silhouette against the fractured window seemed larger than life. As he stepped onto the presidential balcony, the ocean of people erupted into a deafening roar of joy and defiance. Flags waved furiously, fists raised skyward, chants of Traoré. Traoré. Burkina Faso thundered into the morning sky. For the first time since the first bullet had been fired, Ibrahim Traoré allowed himself a small smile, not for his own survival, but for what the people had reclaimed. Freedom. Dignity. Sovereignty. He raised his hand, and the crowd fell into reverent silence. When he spoke, his voice was low but carried like thunder over the crowd. They came in the night to take our country, to silence our voices, to claim our future. They failed. The people erupted again, weeping, cheering, embracing. Traoré held up his hand once more. We have not won a war, he continued solemnly. We have won the right to fight for ourselves. That right must never be given away again. Not to foreign powers. Not to traitors. Not even to me. The crowd stood stunned, absorbing the weight of his words. You are Burkina Faso, he declared. You are the guardians of this land. And together, we write the next chapter. From the rooftops and alleyways, elders smiled. Children waved small hand-painted flags. Soldiers, their uniforms stained with smoke and blood, stood proudly beside farmers, teachers, students. Traoré turned and placed the wooden box on the balcony ledge for all to see. The world's cameras zoomed in. The image would become immortal. The bloodied leader standing tall above a defiant people, with the cursed box open to the sky, empty of fear, full of meaning. The bullet never fired. The warning never delivered. The trap turned into the greatest symbol of resilience. In capitals across the world, stunned diplomats and leaders watched the footage in silence. They had underestimated the strength of a people led by a man who refused to surrender. That morning, headlines would circle the globe. The box that shocked the world, Ibrahim Traoré defies death and defeat. As the sun rose higher, casting its warm light over the reborn streets of Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré walked back inside, silent once again. The real battle, the one for the heart and soul of Burkina Faso, was only just beginning. But the world had been warned. And it would never forget the man who had opened the box and refused to fall.